Ladies and gentlemen, Namaskar. A very warm welcome to the 16th edition of Jaipur Literature Festival, protected by Dettol Banega Swasth India at the Darbar Hall. We are delighted to introduce a Million Missions CSO Coalition at 75. The Million Mission Report, launched in the 75 years of independence, measures the contribution of the Indian non-profit sector. Dedicated to India's estimated 3 million charitable and non-profit organizations, the report examines their contribution, good practices, and innovations that have evolved over the years. The report, being compiled from primary and secondary data by GuideStar, Dasra, X and SSER, will be a benchmark to measure progress towards SDG goals. I now invite Sanjoy, Managing Director of Tima Cards, to take over.
Last year at the Jaipur Literature Festival, we launched a report called Testing the Temperature. We looked at what was the impact of COVID on the arts sector or the creative economy across the country, especially in the performing and visual arts areas. It was at that point of time, Mathew and Amita sitting in the audience thought that why can't we do something around the NPA, the non-profit associations, the NGO and civil society sectors. And we came together as a loose consortium to see whether we could bring a report like this to bear. Many of us know today that the NGO and the NPA sector are at some risk, and the risk is really about the narrative. We are seen to be a different voice, an alternative voice, not necessarily part of the ongoing narrative. And a lot of people are suspicious of what this sector delivers, if they deliver at all. And yet we know that there's a lot of value that this sector brings to the table, both tangible as well as intangible. And what this report has done is really looked at how you can make sure that we're telling a story of change, that we walk together with the governments of our times, not just in India, but across the world in bringing about development. Our contribution to bringing about SDG or the SDG goals are huge. And in India's 75th anniversary, we thought, why don't we put together a report? The last report on the sector was released in 2012 by John Hopkins. There was a similar report by government. John Hopkins' report was from a particular perspective. Government was from a different perspective. And many of the people who worked on this report today have come together, as I said, as a loose consortium to really look at, analyze the data that has been put together. And we'll hear Pushpa and Deval talking about it. But to begin with, we are absolutely delighted to have with us the United Nations Resident Commissioner, Shombi, Ambassador Shombi, to come and release the report. Shombi, can I invite you on stage? We have with us Gayatri Lobo, the CEO of ATE Chandra Foundation, who has been very generous with funding to help us release and make this report possible. From Catalyst 2030, which works towards realizing SDG goals, not just in India, but across the world. It's, again, a coalition, a loose coalition, chapters from across the world. Ramiz, we've got Kasturi, who's the co-author of the report from Dasra. Thank you, Kasturi. And I can't see Amita anywhere. Amita, Mathew? And Amita Mathew, our co-editor. Can I ask you all to come up on stage to begin with? And Mathew Cherian, come. And if some of you come here, somebody should come here. So, one and two, and somebody taking Thank you so much. Can I now ask Mathew Cherian to give us an overview? Shombi, please do sit. Mathew Cherian to give us an overview of how this report came to being and the sector. Mathew.
Good morning to the Jaipur JLF Samaj. And thank you, Shombi Shah, for releasing the report. This report is a labor of love. I would begin with gratitude to the millions of volunteers who work tirelessly in the non-profit sector, and also to the millions of non-profits who work silently in the remote districts of the country, unheard and unsung, providing innovative solutions, last mile delivery with communities, and adding great economic value to the country. There are contributors here in the room: Vipin Sharma, Dr. Alok Sarin, Sanjeev Jain, Kasturi Gandhi, Ramiz Alam, Sushmita, Indrani Sharma, and Amita Joseph, who shepherded us, Mohit Satyanand and Sanjoy Roy of Teamworks Arts Foundation, who helped us throughout in the report, and also to launch it at JLF. Thank you all. NGOs have existed since independence, some even before. Why do they exist? They exist to fill a gap that exists between the governments and the agencies not able to reach the last mile. Many of them are unable to reach the last and the least, as the Mahatma would have put it. And Mahatma Gandhi himself said, you will have to work after independence for the service of the country. And many of them followed to work in leprosy control, in watershed development, rehabilitation, in disability, in juvenile justice, women and work, elderly, the list can go on and on. Here in Jaipur itself, there are some wonderful NGOs. You might have all heard of the work of the Jaipur Foot, SWRC Thilonia, Urmul, MKSS, who gave us the Right to Information Bill, and CUTS, Sikodicon, and Ajivika, and many others. So I would like to pay tribute to the Rajasthan NGOs, which are wonderful, and also to the national NGOs across the country. What was the need for this report? Of course, Sanjoy had mentioned there has not been a significant report on the non-profit sector from 2003, after the John Hopkins report. There was a MOSPI report, which was more of an enumeration rather than a significant contribution to the sector. So now in the 75th year of our independence, we thought it is time that we brought this report to the nation so that we can measure our value to the country. And so we also tried to bring out this report by surveying the whole NGOs across the country. And it was necessary to establish a public, transparent, and resource which has reliable data and in the public domain. This report is based on that need. And so many of the non-profits here, like BCF, Dasra, GuideStar India, Artex, Banyan, Catalyst 2030, Salam Balak Trust, Bal Raksha Bharat, Access, ISDM, SSER, and guided by our good professors of IMA, Ankur, Sarin, and Professor Shankar Datta, we are the CSO coalition at 75 years, which has brought this report. And this report took 6 months, several meetings, a primary survey across 15,000 non-profit organizations, a secondary survey by SSER, and studying the national satellite accounts. And we are here with our modest report, The Million Missions, 75 years of nation building towards servicing. So what are the highlights in this report? The highlights are that about 6.1 million full-time workers work for this non-profit sector, out of which the big story is 3.5 million are volunteers, full-time volunteers who don't get paid. And Jesim Pais from SSER says it is difficult to measure their contribution because they are voluntary. If you don't get paid, you don't get counted in the economy. We contribute in all ways to the SDGs, and one of our big contributions is our contribution to SDG 1, which is zero poverty. And the NGO sector reaches out to 142 million BPL households across the country, which is 14.2 crore households, so that we leave no one behind. So by 2030, if poverty is reduced in this country, it will be the contribution of the non-profit sector. And the contribution of the NPOs has been approximately 2% of our GDP. It was 1.9% in 2019. Last but not least is the millions of non-profit working towards inclusion and equity in the country. Right through COVID, and in many humanitarian crises like the Kutch earthquake, the tsunami, the floods, the non-profit sector has been working in service of the nation. And we have all seen the work of NGOs during COVID with the migrants. And at the moment, what is happening is over-regulation and suspicion of the sector is strangulating our work. It is time we celebrate the services that we provide, the innovations that we provide, and the reach to the last mile in the society. So our recommendations are, please acknowledge the tremendous service of the nation to the million-plus workers across India. Recognize the volunteers, recognize the full-time workers, and an end to the excessive regulations on income tax, FCRA, and various registrars, a level playing field for all the whole sector in recognition of our immense contribution to the nation at 75 years. A suggestion to the UN and the World Bank, like you have an ease of doing business, I think you should have an ease of doing good in the country for the non-profit sector. Thank you all. May a million flowers bloom.
Thank you, Matthew. Matthew, come and sit while we. I'm going to invite Deval to come on and give us an overview of the sector. And just to sort of add, I've asked the UN Resident Commissioner to speak at the end of the presentations to have a more considered point of view from the NGO of all NGOs and the NPAs of all NPAs. But before that, Deval.
Thank you, Sanjay, JLF, and everyone else who's been contributing to this report, and I think more importantly, to the sector overall. I think at times we forget that our country was born out of a civil society movement. Gandhi ji and others came together through philanthropy to working together and created something that not only was then born India as we know it, but has influenced other movements across the world and continues to do so. For us, the point of this report was to also talk about areas or issues where the civil society sector has contributed over the years. And just to give everyone a high-level view, one is Section 377. Does anyone in the audience know about Section 377? If so, if you can just speak up, sir, in the front row. Can you tell us what 377 is about? Sexual freedom. Sexual freedom. Somebody in the back also? Go ahead. She was an intervener. Fantastic. And I think somebody on this side had their hand up. And so Section 377 is a great example of a law that was placed pre-British times, which was banning, in essence, homosexuality. Since that period, 3 organizations came together in different decades to challenge this particular norm. In 1984, an organization focusing on HIV and AIDS started looking and talking about this issue and raised it with the Supreme Court. Naz Foundation ended up doing some work in the early 2000s, and then Humsafar in 2018 actually got that particular section banned and overturned. And I say this because civil society is not about a different sector. It's about each and every one of you here in this room. It is about chances and initiatives that each and every one takes within their society to make a difference in this world. While philanthropy has been credited and heralded, and we talk about givers in various forms giving billions of dollars of wealth away, we forget in India, the civil society and the NGO leaders actually have started their giving much before they earned $1 billion or $1 million. They started giving at the age of 24, 26, 28, actually to right the wrongs that they saw in front of us. Whether it was Preeti Patkar in 1986, starting the first night care shelter of sex workers, children of sex workers, to prevent second-generation trafficking in that industry, or Dr. Mabel and Rajiv Arola, who actually looked at focusing on ASHA workers. These are all sort of initiatives that NGOs took on initially to really make a change in this country. ASHA workers, for those of you who don't know, are now over 1 million strong. They've helped with 25% of deliveries of babies in our country, and was started in 1970 by a community-based organization in Jamkhed, really focusing on how do you get women from the community who may not be trained in our medical colleges, but to help actually with their communities in safe childbirth. Since that time, more than 95% of children in that area actually have some sort of medical support and are affected by ASHA workers. In a similar manner, an organization called Pratham, which many of you may have heard of, that focuses on education, started something called the SSER test, which looks at the quality of education being delivered across the country at a state and municipality level. These are the kind of initiatives that's helping government, private sector, and civil society improve the quality of healthcare and education that's being delivered across the country. And many of these models are now actually being replicated, not just in India, but globally. That's what the civil society is about. So in this report, we have many examples of phenomenal innovations that have occurred in our country by the sector that have been scaled up in partnership with government as well as in other countries. And it's about time, I think, that we start reading about this, learning about this, and engaging with that sector more. We're very, very proud to not just have anecdotes and stories about what's happening, but by partnering with GuideStar India, one of the strongest transparency organizations that exist in the sector today in India and globally, they've done quite a bit of quantitative research on what the value that our organizations bring on a regular basis. And so with that, I'd love to introduce Pushpa, the founder of GuideStar India, to talk a little bit about the data that they've been able to compile and continue to compile, demonstrating the credibility and the accountability that the NGO sector has. Pushpa.
Hi, everyone. If you guys can help me with the deck, please. Thank you. So we heard from Deval some stories, the real stories of impact in different thematic areas, about education, about people's right to their sexual health and stuff. I'm going to talk about the entire nonprofit sector, its dimensions, what kind of organizations are there, what kind of impact they make. And what we're going to actually see is the result of a primary research or survey that was done. It was anchored by GuideStar India, but with the help of all of our coalition partners. And we were guided and supported by the IIM Ahmedabad research team. I don't know if the slides have come up. Okay, thank you. Are they moving forward?
Take it one slide forward, please. Next slide.
Okay, oops, it's gone to my, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so what we did was we reached out to 200,000 nonprofits in the country. To every NGO in the largest database that was publicly available were reached out through email. It was an online survey in English, but with lots of support in Hindi and local languages through webinars and workshops. And about 1,000 organizations answered almost 100 questions, spending a couple of hours on the survey and a lot more gathering that data. And what we tried to find out was who's doing what, where, what are the kind of interventions, what are the kind of partnerships, the trends, the accountability practices, and what do these organizations look like in terms of size and composition. So if we look at the geography, actually our sample kind of mirrors the government's largest public data set provided by Niti Aayog's Darpan, except for some underrepresentation in Uttar Pradesh and a bit of overrepresentation in Tamil Nadu. The geographic distribution is almost identical. And what did we see? 50% of organizations are working in 5 states. You have Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, UP, Delhi. And we see that almost 50% of organizations are pretty local in their work. They work in one state. 22% work in 5 or more states, so almost like a pan-India presence. And we find that 50% are working in the grassroots in villages, and they're working in the aspirational districts. There are about 124 districts put up by Government of India. What are the kind of activities? 70% are doing implementation on the ground, providing services and products through programs or even support in kind or monetary. And what we find is that as regards SDG goals that Mathew kind of talked about, they are working for all the 17 goals, but the key ones are education, health, no poverty, and of course, gender equality. What we also saw is that 94% of organizations say that 2/3 or more of their work is for absolutely the needy people, less privileged or underserved areas. Now, who are these organizations? We see a lot of young people in the audience here. A majority, 87% of organizations were born after 1990, very agile organizations. And half of them are small, annual spending less than 50 lakh rupees. The sector has always been questioned for its governance and accountability. And it's very heartening to say that 2/3 of organizations actually track their reach for their top 3 programs. 84% of people who track said that these numbers can be independently verified. 84% organizations put up their governing body members' details in the public domain. 77% are voluntarily putting up their audited accounts in the public domain. The government doesn't demand them to do that. Except for 1% NGOs who don't prepare accounts, rest of them make their accounts, and I said 84%, 77% are actually putting up in the public domain. Now, where do they get the funds to sustain their programs? The smaller organizations actually depend on their self-generated revenue or retail contributions in money and in kind. The mid to large-sized organizations or more than 1 crore are the ones that seem to be getting support from foundations and CSR. And CSR finds the larger organizations more than 5 crore largely as partners. Now, I said many organizations are working locally. 47% are working in one state or more. What we see is that in the local areas that they work, they're actually lifting up the socioeconomic life. And what do I mean by that? 47% organizations are the biggest source of formal employment in half of the geographies that they work. 64% said that half of their employees are, from the local community, the employees and volunteers. Half of them engage local businesses and vendors to do their work. And when you look at people who spend 5 or more years in the sector, there is a definite lift in their skill sets and their socioeconomic background. Having been in the sector for 2 decades, often I hear people saying that you guys promote generosity, but you don't kind of collaborate. And the survey seems to demolish that. The survey actually says that 57% of organizations are actually strengthening government institutions. A large number of NGOs, like Deval talked about, the workers who are working for children, etc. You actually see them working with panchayats, municipalities, government schools, the PHCs. And if you look across the size, organizations are very much into collaborating amongst the others in the sector with government and business. Of course, the bigger organizations are doing more partnerships. And this is the number of people who have formal agreements and not some casual interaction. Let's quickly look at what has been the trend in the last 5 years, 15 years, and the impact of COVID. In the last 5 years, there have been difficult years, but a good number of NGOs are actually saying, half of them, that they've increased their reach in terms of the peoples whose lives they impact. They have increased in size of operations. COVID did affect, and the smaller and medium-sized organizations, at least 2/3 of them had some kind of loss of revenue or some kind of attrition of people. But organizations who've been around since 2007, last 15 years, say that in spite of the bumpy ride, whether it's economic or regulatory, they've actually managed to create greater impact. So that's all from me, and you can kind of look at this QR and register yourself to download the report. There are lots of insights that will come up in the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Pushpa. And just to say that this is the first part of the report. What we're hoping to do is that every few months take out a new sectoral report and also make this available to everybody, and they can build on the report. This is not the be-all and the end-all of the report. We know that there are a lot of missing bits that still need to be done in this. We're now going to move forward. I'm going to ask the UN Resident Commissioner, who is the head of all NGOs and NPAs, to talk a little bit about what is the importance of civil society, how do they help in delivering the SDGs, and perhaps to some extent, SDG 17, I think it talks about collaborations that we've just been mentioning. How can we strengthen this, and how can we work together with government? In the G20 track, there is a whole thing about civil societies, which we hope will motivate government to perhaps look at this sector somewhat differently. That's one of the purposes of this report, to move away from being looked at with suspicion, looked at as not necessarily being part of their narrative, but being looked at as equal partners. Shombi Shah.
Thank you so much, Sanjoy, Mathew, Pushpa, colleagues. Namaste to everybody. It's wonderful to be here speaking with you. I mean, I am a little bit sad, I have to say, though, because I get the feeling that JLF is coming towards the end. But such a, this is the highlight of the calendar. And just to again thank Sanjoy and all the teamwork colleagues for making this experience possible for all of us, and already looking forward to next year. So I think, this is really an unbelievably important publication, India's Million Missions. I think that it's no secret that the important role of civil society has been, at the core of the United Nations concept of sustainable inclusive development since the very founding of the UN in 1945. And the Secretary General is always striving to update this understanding so that we are keeping pace with the pace of modernity and technology and innovation. The Secretary General's Our Common Agenda specifically highlights how important is continuing to have this robust sort of, you could almost call it a trinity of partnerships to achieve the SDGs Agenda 2030 agenda. And that's governments, of course, absolutely. Governments of all types, intergovernmental relations, multilateral, bilateral, national governments, central, state, local governments, absolutely. But also the truly, truly critical, important role of civil society and also of business. So the nonprofit and the profit side of outside of the government. And this is based on simple comparative advantages. So it's nothing about, criticizing any of the three, but it's just that each of these institutional organizations and setups brings special comparative advantages. And of course, by definition, civil society being the closest to the ground, the principle of sort of subsidiarity is the best able to understand the needs and the priorities of communities to provide that last mile outreach. And as we've seen here today, India is absolutely no exception at all. And we see the critical role that civil society has played in helping to achieve important deliverables on education, on health, livelihoods, poverty reduction, how to experiment, to innovate, to kind of pave the way for new models of development delivery, and the ASHA workers was given as a, a fantastic example. I think one of the best parts of my job, maybe the best part of my job, is I have the opportunity to travel around India and meet with communities, engage with communities, to learn about the work that the United Nations is doing. And this is always, in partnership with government, supporting what government is doing, the leadership, but quite often in partnership with civil society, and just incredible examples. And of course, it comes very clearly to mind when we speak about crisis response. So the COVID crisis, I mean, this is something that we saw, was mentioned, but this a fantastic response. I mean, you just look at vaccination programs, for example, and you see this continuum of partnership. The Indian pharmaceutical industry, developing vaccinations, the digital tech stack, the CoVIN platform, government-led platform, providing the ability to deliver well over 2 billion vaccinations. But then also, very importantly, community, civil society organizations, community-based micro-organizations, larger ones, formal ones, providing that last mile connectivity to ensure that people are coming out of their homes, even in a time of distress, and getting vaccinated. So I think that, what we need to do is, and this report does such an excellent job, is to understand the fundamentally important role that civil society is playing in partnership across the SDGs. So not just in the time of crisis, but every single day. And if I'm not mistaken, the report is showing that civil societies in India, organizations are making a real change in something like over 200 people's lives every single day. And the numbers are sort of hard to fathom. So this is a celebration of the journey, the path of civil society and the partnership with government and other elements in this 75 years of independence, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. Also a path looking forward. What do we need to do collectively to ensure that this vital element of our development journey remains vibrant, remains funded? The issues of accountability, of transparency, of professionalism are all very much supported. I think, the Secretary General, when he was here last year, was really captured by the incredible diversity of India, the diversity of experiences, of perspectives, and the role of civil society certainly playing in that. And in fact, this really is the only way that we can make it through not just the short-term crises, the ones that we don't expect, the COVIDs, for example, but importantly, the triple planetary crisis, climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, the need to provide livelihoods for India's greatest youth generation in history moving forward. And I think perhaps I'll share one quote I heard actually here in India by Shamina Singh, an Indian American, actually vice president of MasterCard's sort of inclusive business unit. And she was saying, using the old adage, if you want to go wide, go with government. If you want to go fast, go with business. If you want to go deep, you go with civil society. But if you want to go far, we must all go together. Each one is an absolutely critical component in that. Saath hai to sambhav hai. And this is the message. And I'm so pleased to be able to carry on the best part of my job, which actually, as soon as we finish here, or maybe an hour later, I'm off to go to see Jaipur Foot and learn about the important work that they're doing, and about the important role of civil society here in Jaipur in Rajasthan. But really, truly, India brings a remarkable presence. And a last note, and actually, as you mentioned, Sanjoy, there's never been a more important time to be working in this space and helping ensure a thriving sort of civil society and development process here in India. And there's never been a more exciting time to be working in this space in India, in the world. India's opportunity to drive learnings and innovations and progress at the global stage has never been greater. And the G20 presidency, for example, as you've just mentioned, we're working closely with the G20 Secretariat. The C20, Civil Society 20, is such an important stream within that. And so the work that you all are doing here is obviously, first and foremost, about driving prosperity and sustainability and inclusion in Indian communities. But it has an absolute reverberation across the world. We estimate that something like almost half of the global targets of 2030 agenda actually must be achieved here in India. So to conclude, I love the old phrase, think globally, act locally. But it strikes me that in India, when you think globally and you act locally, you are also acting globally. Thank you very much. Bahut dhanyavad.
Thank you, Shombi Saab, for your continuous support. Thank you, Mathew, Deval Sanghavi, and Pushpa Amanji for your presentation and information about the report. Now we will have a panel discussion with Ankur, Sarin. So may I invite Ankur Sarin on stage. Ankur Sarin, Professor, IIM Ahmedabad.
Where am I sitting? Sorry. Order of sitting?
Ankur will be here. Sorry, Ankur. Jesim Pais, Founder, Director, Society for Social and Economic Research. Vandana Shiva, Founder, Navdanya, and author. And to moderate the session, we have Sanjoy. So over to Sanjoy.
I'm conscious of time, and one of the things is we will do a whole series of conversations over this coming year in different parts of the country. This is really to give you all a taster. So I'm going to start with Ankur. Ankur, India loves reports. They think the minute they have a report, it's done and dusted. You put it in the dustbin and you forget about it. Tell us a little bit about what are the challenges that you faced when we came to you in terms of just enumerating and understanding how this report could come about and telling a particular story.
I think the biggest challenge is the sheer diversity, which is also the strength of the sector. But the challenge for us when we are trying to reduce all of this diversity, complexity, and richness into numbers, right? And so which numbers do you actually go out and measure? Which numbers can you measure accurately, robustly? And I think, that's what we've tried to do, but with a grounded understanding of what we think the sector does, and, what are in some ways the neglected aspects as far as the narrative around the sector go. And I think that's what we've really tried hard to do in this report.
Ankur, one of the concerns that Arun Maira brought up when he saw the report, he said, but how can you enumerate the work that's put in by the sector? Because so much of it is intangible, because you can't measure the development at that point of time. You measure development of a sector across a period of time and across generations. So how do you address that?
So I think what we've tried to do is say what's common, what's shared amongst this diversity of organizations. And, yes, the outcomes are intergenerational. They take a long time. And the most important ones are not something that we are even going to discover even in our lifetimes. But I think still the aspects in terms of saying where are these organizations working, who are they working with, the fact that they are upskilling, employing some of the most disadvantaged populations who would otherwise the profit-seeking organizations would not perhaps even work with. And I think it's trying to, in some sense, capture the essence of the processes, which are also empowering. The outcomes, sure, they will take time, they're complex, they're different, attribution is an issue, but can we actually capture some of the processes? And I think that's what we've tried hard to do here.
Vandana, you've been a champion of the sector and many causes, not just here in India, but in worldwide forums. Why do people love to hate the sector? And what is it that we've been doing wrong in terms of our narrative?
I don't think the problem is with the sector or its narrative. The problem is the fact that at a time where every aspect of the Earth's systems is to be sacrificed, and every aspect of social and economic justice is to be destroyed, we become the protective wall. And we become the conscience of society in a serious way. we have our nerves, our finger on the pulse. And at least from my lifetime of, in 50 years, every ecological movement of this country has begun from communities and supporting organizations. Every law on environment has been written because of movements like Chipko, because of what happened with the Bhopal disaster. So if we are being targeted, we should treat it as a compliment, that we are making a difference. And years ago, The Economist had an article that till the NGOs are gotten rid of, the rule of the 1% will never be established. So it's about corporate rule, and it's about the role of government shifting from being of the people, by the people, for the people, to becoming of the corporations, for the corporations, by the corporations. We are living in times of corporate rule. And the point is, it is totally unsustainable. I think one exercise we could and should do is take the SDGs and where the civil society efforts will take us, and where without civil society, we will never reach those goals. And the second is, my life has been based on the earth as one family. The work of Navdanya is about diversity as the organizing principle of this ecological civilization that we are, Bharat. Interestingly, the G20 has picked up the one humanity, one earth. And I think civil society should write its own report of what that means. And it means that the central role of civil society to keep society from becoming uncivil.
Shombi Sharp talked about how, absolutely. Shombi Sharp talked about how if India was able to achieve its SDG goals, you'll be able to achieve the SDG goals for the world to about 50%. We've seen that it's not just civil society. To be able to go far and wide, we need to work with government. We need to work with corporates, as he said, to work swiftly. What is it that we need to do to come together? How do we build trust between these three different pillars, which at many points are at odds with each other, as we've seen, especially in Middle India, where mining has become, and forest rights and dweller rights have become some of the key flashpoints between civil society, government, and corporations?
Well, every one of the laws that were put into place post-globalization, which is about corporate rule, were laws created by people's struggles and civil society support. Whether it's the Forest Rights Act, or it's the Panchayati Raj extension, or it's Article 3D and 3J of the Patent Amendment. My sister Meera's here, who was very active on the 3D, and I played a big role in Article 3J, which says plants, animals, and seeds are not human inventions. Therefore, they cannot be patented. And I think what we need to do is both continue the path we have been walking, deepen our solidarities, definitely deepen the solidarities across the sectors. I chose to work on agriculture as the way to defend planetary sustainability, because I could see chemical agriculture was destroying so much of biodiversity, but it was 50% of the climate crisis. But the health movement is related to the food we eat. And as we've done in many festivals, agriculture and crafts go hand in hand. And we need those new integrations. I think we should stop thinking and working from a defensive position.
Stop thinking and working from a defensive position. Jesim, your report has been really seminal, and I think all of us have had so many arguments around it, even as you put the report together in terms of double counting, CSR. How do we ensure that we come up with something that's substantial? Can you briefly sum up some of the aspects that you found in this report? And do read that particular chapter for all of you. I mean, the Timmy and Apurva here, absolutely seminal to read this particular chapter.
Yeah, the part, am I audible? The part that we have worked on is trying to estimate the...
Just hold it closer.
Trying to estimate the economic contribution of the sector. And as we've discussed, one major contribution, one major part of the work of the sector, it is argued that it cannot be measured. It is intangible. There are people who say you should not measure, meaning they're offended that you try to measure, meaning the sector creating awareness about climate change. It should not be measured in monetary terms. So that is one. So that is a part that we couldn't measure.
Or in fact, forest rights, for example, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, all of these, how do you measure the impact? Not just today, but 50 years down the line.
Work on democracy, freedom, human rights is something not to be measured. So let's say that's one contribution we don't measure. Then there are other contributions which take long time to fructify. That's again something very difficult to measure. Then we are left with, let's say, a small part which can be measured by economists like us. So we've done this effort to measure the contribution of this small part, and in terms of rupees, and we've presented in the report. So that comes to roughly about 2% of India's GDP. So
but isn't that more than the mining contribution to India's GDP?
It's quite a lot. It's quite a lot. The contribution is quite a lot. But as I said, and it has been said before here, a lot of work done by the NGO sector is voluntary. It's full-time, it's overtime. So we've brought that together and come to this number. And there will be some issues with the number. Some would like to have it larger, and some would say it's too big. But it's true. It's bigger than many sectors that we have in the country. And as we said, it's work in progress. There are some parts of the sector which have not been covered. There's an informal part which is partly covered. Shall I say, in this, we need a large national level survey, and where government should have a role. It's called satellite accounting. The last satellite accounting was done in 2012, reference period 2007. One of the recommendations would be to push for next round of satellite accounts.
Ankur, before I open it up, he's talking about numbers. Do numbers lie?
Numbers always tell a partial story. They always tell an incomplete story. I wouldn't say, I mean, you can make them lie, but, you know, but at the end of the day, yes, they are incomplete. And I think we have to, the only way to, in some ways, complete the missing part of the story is greater engagement. And so if numbers help some people engage better with civil society, I think they're worth it. So, you know, so yes, they're inadequate, but they are necessary also.
So this is our version, you know, red wine producers got together a report which said if you drink 2 glasses of red wine, it's good for your heart. Dark chocolate people did the same. We're doing the same for the NGO NPA sector. We're opening it up to the audience for a couple of questions. Any questions in the house? Otherwise, I'll go back to them. Right at the back. And Timmy after that.
Thank you for the lovely presentation.
And if you're from an NGO, please introduce yourself.
Yes, I've been working in the NGO sector for over 20 years, and I'm still, I still work in the NGO sector. The question I have is it, and I work in impact measurement, which hopefully sets context to my question. Is there any plans to kind of go beyond what is easily capturable as impact? Because sometimes it feels it's just a failure of our imagination around opportunity cost to be able to say, what if we didn't raise awareness, what would be the, what would be the impact? So is there any plans to kind of try and quantify the impact of what we think is hard to capture, the impact that we think is hard to capture?
Thank you for that question. So I'll go back to what I said. We will try our best to capture what could not be captured so far and what should be captured. But having said that, I think a major part of our report should have a descriptive section which highlights what you said. I don't think we should reduce everything to numbers. There will be a part with numbers, but we will describe the efforts, work done by the sector.
And what we will do is also put down the good practices that we are seeing, the good practices and the innovations across sectors, so that they can be multiplied and can be celebrated and build trust across the 3 different parts of this.
Can I just add, we have actually asked the organizations also to report on many of these numbers. They're still in some ways being processed because those are the more, complex issues as well. Yeah.
Timmy. Mike.
Thank you. You've compiled a report, but there has been no mention of animal protection organizations in the country, which are doing wonderful work right from Chennai to Udaipur to Bombay. And I work with an animal organization which is 43 years old, started 43 years ago. And we do an animal, besides protecting every, right from a pigeon to a camel and fighting for the captive elephants, we also do an animal birth control program and immunization against rabies, which impacts the health of all the health of humans. And it's so interconnected. So animal is not an outside entity. I know there's a lot of focus on wildlife, which is very glamorous, everyone, but the captive animals on the street, we have run a hospital and we've reduced the rabies in Jaipur last 12 years for less than 3%. There are hardly any cases of rabies, and reduce the dog population by 60%. So there are lesser dog bites and less human problems. So I think it's so interconnected.
So Timmy, if you were able to take the initiative and as a consortium get all of these groups together and create a chapter which we can include in the report. This report is not about us being precious that we've done a report. We want it to be inclusive. It'll be an ongoing, evolving process for a year. So please take this initiative, add the chapter, send us the good practices, give us the overview, and help us enumerate this particular aspect of it.
I'd love to do that. Thank you.
Done. Matthew, at the end, over to you. Last question, because we've run out of time, and one from Punita. I'll take all three questions together because the beep is gone. So one here, one from Punita, one at the back. Quickly, short.
My name is Rukmini Prabhakar. I represent the Art of Living. We have a presence in all 27 states, working across all 17 sectors. Vandana ji, I've met you at the ashram. My question is, we have millions of volunteers working. At the end of the day, they're so happy doing what they do, they don't write their stories. There are a lot of your stories that are not going, a lot of your data and a lot of your stories that will never be known. And you can't ever make a consolidated report unless these stories are captured. Have you thought about this?
Yes, so every institution, we've been encouraging every institution to capture their stories because we can't. And we'll create an online program, an online website to be able to capture these stories. Punita.
Yeah, I just want to say, we talk about impact assessment. So we put a lot of pressure on the government, activist movements happen. However, what we've seen, I work in juvenile justice, it's all followed by the form. I mean, the government introduces stuff, but it's just ticking boxes. There is no soul, there is no change actually happening when you go and ask them. Similarly with corporates. It's just a thing of saying, okay, yes, we have all this in CSR, but the programs are not being implemented the way they ought to be done, with the right intent and with the right impact. So I'm just wondering whether our communication or our strategy needs to change in
Communication or strategy, does it need to change?
Yeah, I'm from Vatsalya, Jaipur. See, I think the numbers are very much essential, but sometimes numbers corrupt. So each number have to be challenged. So there has to be, continuous challenge process should be on. But that will give only one aspect of it. Another aspect is definitely what you are saying, that of course text is very important. The impact, I think sometimes, people are asking, okay, in 1 year, what is the impact? Sometimes it's ridiculous. So that is what.
Thank you. So any strategy change, any suggestions?
I think that's precisely the point. That's why we have to come together to bring the soul to all of this, right? And I think that's what we're trying to do here. So hopefully, as Vandana ji also is saying, we will always, the heart is here. And they might do whatever they want to, but we have to write our own story. And I think that's what's happening here. So.
Yeah, I think we should stop seeing ourselves as the third sector, separate from society and separate from the earth. That we are the people who had jobs, who gave up academics, who've done everything that the mainstream offered, and we decided to come closer to where life ticks. And I think we're going to enter a huge period of turbulence and huge period of deep inequality. And I think a big part of our work is to both courageously articulate the future that will come if we keep going on the path, recognize that every living system has negative feedbacks to keep it within regulation, and that the fact that we are the negative feedback for sustainability and social justice does not make us negative. It makes us necessary for the continuation of our society and the earth.
Courageous is the statement. Thank you all so much. Ankur, Jesim, Vandana, Shiva, Shombi Sharp, all our panelists. Just to say that NGOs too need to take responsibility. Pushpa and all our colleagues across organizations reached out to over 200,000 NGOs. We got 1,000 responses, 551 or 556, which were filled up completely. So finally, if we want to make a change, it has to start from us. It can't be from somewhere else. So let's work together collectively to bring about this change. Thank you. Please follow the QR code. We're going to be doing a number of sessions across the country, across states and districts through the year to be able to disseminate this report and get more feedback. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ankur, Sarin, Jatin, Pais, and Vandana, Shiva, and Sanjoy for the riveting session. Go up in the field, bring the change, and be the change. Thank you.
There